Hello students, welcome to today's class. Today's topic is about student diversity. We see that students often differ in many ways, both individually and because they are part of a particular family, community or a cultural group. Sometimes the differences can make classroom style teaching more challenging, but other times they simply enrich classroom life. Understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing the individual differences is known as diversity. Individual differences are qualities that are unique. Just one person has them at a time. Variation in hair color, for example, is an individual difference. Even though some people have nearly the same hair color, no two people are exactly the same. Group differences, on the other hand, are qualities shared by members of an identifiable group or community but not shared by everyone in the society. An example is gender role. The male is perceived differently and expected to behave a bit differently than females. To teach students well, we need to understand the important ways that they differ among themselves and when or how the differences really matter for their education. This present module offers some of that understanding and suggests how we can use it in order to make learning effective and enjoyable for everyone, including yourself. First, we'll try to understand the concept of individual styles of learning and thinking. All of us, including students, have preferred ways of learning. Teachers often refer to these differences as learning styles. One student may like to make diagrams to help remember a reading assignment, whereas another student may prefer to write a sketchy outline instead. Yet in many cases, the student could reverse the strategies and still learn the material. The diagram maker could take notes for a change and the note taker could draw diagrams. Both would still learn, though neither might feel as comfortable as when using the strategies that they prefer. This reality suggests that a balanced, middle of the road approach may be a teacher's best response to students' learning styles. Or put in another way, it is good to support students' preferred learning strategies wherever possible and appropriate, but neither necessary nor desirable to do so all of the time. There is a research evidence that individuals, including students, do differ in how they think. These differences in thinking leads to different learning styles or preferences. And psychologists sometimes call them as cognitive styles, which means typical ways of perceiving and remembering information, and typical ways of solving problems and making decisions. There are various ways of learning styles which we will discuss now. First is field dependence and field independence. In a style of thinking called field dependence, for example, individuals perceive patterns as a whole rather than focus on parts of the patterns separately. In a complementary tendency called field independence, individuals are more inclined to analyze overall patterns into their parts. Someone who's field dependent, that means perceived globally or holistically, in one situations tend to be modest extent to perceive things globally or holistically in other situations. Field dependence and independence can be important in understanding students because the styles affect students' behavior and preferences in school and classroom. Field dependent persons tend to work better in groups and they prefer open ended fields of study like literature and history. Field independent persons, on the other hand, tend to work better alone and they prefer highly analytic studies like math and science. The next learning style is impulsivity and reflectivity. As the names imply, an impulsive cognitive style is one in which a person reacts quickly, but as a result makes comparatively more errors. A reflective style is the opposite. The person reacts more slowly and therefore makes fewer errors. The reflective style would seem better suited to many academic demands of school. Research has found that This style is beneficial for learning academic skills such as mathematical problem solving or certain reading tasks. However, some classroom or school related skills may actually develop better if a student is relatively impulsive also. For example, being a good partner in a cooperative learning group, for example, may depend partly on responding spontaneously or impulsively to other suggestions. And being an effective member of an athletic team may depend on not taking time to reflect carefully on every move that you or your teammates make. There, impulsivity works in a better way. What is the importance of knowing these learning styles of students? There are two major ways to use this knowledge of students' learning styles. The first is to build on students' existing style, strengths, and preferences. A student who is field independent and reflective, for example, can be encouraged to explore tasks and activities that are relatively analytic and that require relatively independent work. One who is field dependent and impulsive, on the other hand, can be encouraged and supported to try tasks and activities that are more social or spontaneous. Then the second way to use knowledge of learning styles is to encourage more balance in learning styles for students who need it. A student who lacks field independence, for example, may explicit help in organizing and analyzing key academic tasks like organizing a lab report in a science class, etc. One who is already highly reflective may need encouragement to try ideas spontaneously, as in a creative writing lesson. Now, after this, the next concept in diversity is multiple intelligence. For nearly a century, educators and psychologists have debated the nature of intelligence, and more specifically, whether intelligence is just one broad ability or can take more than one form. Many classical definitions of concept have tended to define intelligence as a single broad ability that allows a person to solve or complete many sorts of tasks, or at least many academic tasks like reading, knowledge of vocabulary, and solving of logical problems, etc. There is a research evidence of such a global ability, and the idea of general intelligence often fits with society's everyday beliefs about intelligence. But there are also problems with defining intelligence as one general ability. One way of summing up the problems is to say that conceiving of intelligence as something general tends to put it beyond teachers' influence. When viewed as a single or purpose ability, it means students either have a lot of intelligence or they do not have any intelligence. Strengthening their intelligence becomes a major challenge or perhaps even an impossible one. But alternate views of intelligence also exist that portray intelligence as having multiple forms, whether the forms are subparts of a single broader ability or are multiple intelligences in their own right. For various reasons, such this perspective has gained in popularity among teachers in recent years, probably because it reflects many teachers' beliefs that students cannot simply be rated along a single scale of ability, but are fundamentally diverse. One of the most prominent of these models is Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence. Gardner proposes that there are 8 different forms of intelligence, each of which functions independently of each other. Linguistic intelligence, which refers to verbal skill and ability to use language well. It can be used in activities such as verbal persuasion and writing a term paper skillfully. Next is musical intelligence, which refers to the ability to create and understanding music. It can be used in singing, playing a musical instrument, and composing a tune. Then comes logical intelligence, which refers to mathematical logical skill, the ability to reason, often using mathematics, solving mathematical problems easily and accurately, and developing and testing hypotheses. The next one is spatial intelligence, which is the ability to imagine and manipulate the arrangement of objects in the environment. It can be used in activities such as completing a difficult jigsaw puzzle or assembling a complex appliance such as a bicycle, etc. Then comes bodily or kinesthetic intelligence, which refers to sense of balance. This intelligence is applied in coordination, in use of one's body, such as dancing and gymnastics. The next one is interpersonal intelligence. It is an ability to understand others' nonverbal feelings and thoughts, such as sensing when to be tactful or sensing a subtext or implied message in a person's statements. Then there is intrapersonal intelligence, which is the sensitivity to one's own thoughts and feelings, such as noticing complex ambivalent feelings in oneself and identifying motives of an action in oneself. Finally, it is naturalistic intelligence. It is a sensitivity to subtle differences and patterns found in natural environment, such as identifying examples of species of plants or animals, or noticing relationship among species and natural processes in the environment. The multiple intelligence theory itself can be useful as a way for teachers to think about their work. Multiple intelligence suggests that the importance of diversifying instruction in order to honor and to respond to diversity in students' talents and abilities. It may not be important to label students' talents or intellectual strengths. It may be more important simply to provide important learning and knowledge in several modes or styles, ways that draw one or more than one possible form of intelligence or skill. A good example of this principle is it is good and well to read books, but it is even better to read books and talk with classmates and educators and get actual experience in the classroom. The combination of both invites and requires a wide range of your talents and usually proves more effective than any single type of activity, whatever your profile of cognitive styles or intellectual abilities happens to be. New way of thinking about students who have special gifts and talents. Traditionally, the term gifted referred only to students with unusually high verbal skills. Their skills were demonstrated especially well in school achievement. More recently, however, the meaning of gifted has broadened to include unusual talents in the range of activities such as music, creative writing, or the arts. To indicate the change, educators often use the dual term gifted and talented. Now, there are some of the qualities of gifted and talented. Generally, gifted and talented children show some combination of these qualities. They learn more quickly and independently than most students of their own age. They often have well developed vocabulary as well as advanced reading and writing skills. They are very motivated, especially on tasks that are challenging or difficult. They hold themselves to higher than usual standards of achievement. Contrary to a common impression, students who are gifted or talented are not necessarily awkward socially, less healthy, or narrow in their interest. In fact, quite the contrary. They also come from all the economic and cultural groups. Ironically, in spite of their obvious strength as learners, such students often suffer in school unless teacher can provide them with more than the challenge of their usual curriculum. A kindergarten child who is giftedly advanced in reading, for example, may make little further progress at reading if her teachers do not recognize and develop her skill. Her talent may effectively disappear from view as her peers gradually catch up to her initial level. Without accommodation to their unusual level of skill or knowledge, students who are gifted or talented can become bored by school, and eventually the boredom can even turn into behavioral problems. Thus, supporting students who are gifted and talent is very important. Coming to the supporting gifted and talent, it usually involves a mixture of two strategies: acceleration and enrichment of usual curriculum. Acceleration involves either a child skipping a grade or else the teacher redesigning the curriculum within the particular grade or classroom so that more material is covered faster. Either strategy works, but only up to a point. Children who have skipped a grade usually function well in higher grade, both academically and socially. But unfortunately, skipping grades cannot happen repeatedly unless teacher, parents and the student themselves are prepared to live with large age and maturity differences within the single classroom. In itself too, there is no guarantee that instruction in new higher grade classroom will be of any more stimulating than it was in the former lower grade. Redesigning the curriculum is also beneficial to the student, but impractical to do on a widespread basis. Even if teacher had time to redesign their programs, many non-gifted students would be left behind as a result. Next is enrichment. Enrichment involves providing additional or different instruction added to the usual curriculum goals and activities. Instead of books at more advanced reading levels, for example, a student might read a wide variety types of literature at the student's current reading level, or try writing additional types of literature himself. Instead of moving ahead to more difficult kinds of math programs, the student might work on unusual logic problems not assigned to the rest of the class. Like acceleration, enrichment works well up to a point. Enrichment curriculum exists to help classroom teachers working with gifted students. Since enrichment is not part of normal, officially sanctioned curriculum, however, there is a risk that it will be perceived as busy work rather than as an intellectual stimulation, particularly if the teacher herself is not familiar with the enrichment material or is otherwise unable to involve herself in the material fully. Therefore, if proper guidance and support from parents and teachers is provided for gifted children, they can do exceptionally well in all aspects of their life. The next aspect of diversity is gender differences in the classroom. Gender roles are the patterns of behaviors, attitudes, and expectations associated with a particular gender, with being either male or female. Physical differences in gender roles are very important. Physically, boys tend to be more active than girls and by same token more restless if they have to sit for long periods. They are also more prone than girls to rely on physical aggression if they are frustrated. Both tendencies are inconsistent with the usual demands of classroom life, which makes it a little more likely that school will be a difficult experience for boys, even for boys who never actually get in trouble for being restless or aggressive. During the first 2 or 3 years of primary school, gross motor skills develop at almost the same average rate for both boys and girls. As a group, both boys and girls can run, jump, throw a ball with equal ease. Though there are, of course, wide significant differences among individuals of both genders. Towards the end of primary school, however, boys pull ahead of girls at these skills. The most likely reason is that boys participate more actively in formal and informal sports because of expectations and support from the parents, peers, and society. Puberty then eventually adds to this advantage by making boys taller and stronger than girls on an average, and therefore more suited at least for sports that rely on height and strength. Coming to social differences in gender roles. When relaxing socially, boys more often settle to large groups, whether on the playground, in the school, or on the street. Boys' social group tend literally to fill up lot of space and often include organized and semi-organized competitive games or sports. Girls, on the other hand, are more likely to seek and maintain one or two close friends and to share more intimate information and feelings with these individuals. To the extent that these gender differences occur, they can make girls less visible or noticeable than boys, at least in leisure play situations where children or youth choose their companions freely. As with physical differences, however, in mind that differences in social interactions do not occur uniformly for all boys and girls. There are boys with close friends contradicting the general trend and girls who play primarily in large groups also. Differences in social interaction styles happen in a classroom as well. Boys on average are more likely to speak up during a class discussion, sometimes even if not called on or even if they do not know as much the topic as others in the class. When working on a project in small co-ed group, furthermore, they have tendency to ignore girls' comments and contributions to the group. In this respect, co-ed student groups parallel interaction patterns in many parts of the society where men also have a tendency to ignore women's comments and contributions. Academic and cognitive differences in gender. On average, girls are more motivated than boys to perform well in school, at least during elementary school. By the time girls reach high school, however, some may try to downplay their own academic ability in order to make themselves more likable by both sexes. Even if this occurs, though it does not affect their grades, from kindergarten through 12th grade, girls earn slightly higher average grades than boys. This fact does not lead to similar achievement. However, because as youngsters move into high school, they tend to choose courses or subjects conventionally associated with their gender. For example, math and science for boys in particular, and literature and arts for girls. By the end of high school, this difference in course selection makes a measurable difference in boys and girls' academic performance in these subjects. Coming to the next aspect of student diversity, which is differences in cultural expectations and styles. A culture is a system of attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that constitute the distinctive way of life of a people. In this broad sense, culture is nearly synonymous with ethnicity, which refers to common language, history, and future experienced by a group within society. Culture has elements that are obvious, like unique customs, but also are features that are subtle or easy for outsiders to overlook, like beliefs about nature of intelligence or about a proper way to tell a story, etc. When a classroom draws students from many cultures or ethnic groups, they bring considerable diversity. Teachers need to understand that diversity, understand how students' habitual attitudes, beliefs, and behavior differ from each other. But this kind of understanding can get complicated. One of the major aspects of cultural differences in present society is bilingualism, which is language differences in the classroom. Although monolingual speakers often do not realize it, the majority of the children around the world are bilingual, meaning that they understand and use two languages. In India, majority schools have English as their medium of instruction. This makes students bilingual. In classrooms, as in other social settings, bilingualism exists in different forms and degrees. At one extreme are students who speak both English and other language fluently. At the other extreme are those who speak only limited version of both languages. In between are students who speak their home language much better than English, as well as others who have partially lost their heritage language in the process of learning English. Commonly, too, a student may speak a language satisfactorily but be challenged by reading or writing it, though even this pattern has individual expectations. Whatever is the case, each bilingual student poses unique challenge to teachers. The student who speaks both language fluently has a definite cognitive advantage. As you might suspect, and as research has confirmed, a fully fluent bilingual student is in a better position than usual to express concepts or ideas in more than one way and to be aware of doing so. There is also the concept of language loss. Language loss is a situation in which a student is acquiring English but losing the ability with the student's home language. This sort of bilingualism is quite common in our country these days. This situation might not at first seem like a problem for which teachers need to take responsibility as students are acquiring the dominant language of instruction. In fact, however, things are not that simple. Research finds that language loss limits students' ability to learn English as well or as quickly as they otherwise can do. Having a large vocabulary in first language, for example, has been shown to save time in learning vocabulary in second language. A student can only realize the savings if their first language is well maintained. It is important, at least for a few years, though not forever, young students are encouraged to use both of their languages. Then we talk about cultural differences in attitudes and beliefs. In addition to differences in languages and in practices related to languages, cultural groups differ in a variety of other attitudes and beliefs. For teachers, however, the most important ones center on beliefs about identity or the sense of self or of who you are. A number of other cultural beliefs and practices can be understood as resulting from how members of a culture think about their personal identity. For example, in Western culture, the self is usually thought of as a unique and independent, a unitary, living source of decisions, choices, and actions that stands by itself. This view of self is well rooted in schools, as for example, when students are expected to take responsibility of their own success or failures, and when they are tested and evaluated individually rather than as a group or a team. As teachers, furthermore, more people subscribe to the idea that all students are unique, even if we cannot implement this idea fully in teaching because of the constraints of large classes. Whatever the circumstances, teachers tend to believe in an independent self. Whereas Indian culture believes in something closer to an interdependent self, or a belief that it is your relationships and responsibilities and not uniqueness and autonomy that define a person. In this culture, the most worthy person is not the one who is unusual or who stands out in a crowd. Such a person might actually be regarded as lonely or isolated. The worthy person here is instead the one who gets along well with family and friends, who meets obligations to them reliably and skillfully. At some level, of course, we all value interpersonal skill and to this extent think of ourselves as interdependent. The difference between individual and interdependent self is one important aspect which influences the behavior of the students in the classroom. Thus, it is important for teachers to address this diverse culture of students by preference for activities that are cooperative rather than competitive. Many activities in schools are competitive, even when teachers try to de emphasize the competition. Once past the first year or second year of school, students often become attentive to who receives the highest marks on an assignment, for example, or who is the best athlete at the various sports event, whose contribution to class discussion is most verbal, etc. Classroom life can then become explicitly competitive, and the competitive atmosphere can interfere with cultivating supportive relationships among students or between students and the teachers. Now, let us understand what we have learned in today's class. We have seen that students differ in multitude of ways, both individually and as groups. Individually, for example, students have a preferred learning style as well as preferred cognitive or thinking styles. They also have unique profiles or intelligence or competence that affect how and what they learn most successfully. In addition to individual diversity, students tend to differ according to their gender, although there are numerous individual expectations. Motor abilities as well as motivation and experience with athletics gradually differentiate boys and girls, especially when they reach and begin high school. Socially, boys tend to adopt relationships that are more active and wide ranging than do girls. Academically, it is seen that girls tend to be a bit more motivated to receive slightly higher marks in school. Students also differ according to culture, language, and ethnic groups of their families. Many students are bilingual with educational consequences that depend on their fluency in each of their two languages. If they have more difficulty with English, then programs that add their first language together with English have proved to be helpful. If they have more difficulty with their first language, there are risks of language loss, and consequences are also negative even if more hidden from teachers' views. Differences in attitudes and in use of language have several consequences for teachers. In particular, where appropriate, they should consider using cooperative activities.